that this reorganization does not set the air marshals back in any way, particularly with respect to training operations or adding unnecessary layers of bureaucracy. While I can understand TSA's desire to restructure itself amidst all the criticism it gets, it should not make these types of decisions in haste. The ultimate goal should be to provide security while reducing the cost to the taxpayer in a tight economy. So if reorganization such as this does not lead to any cost saving, it is difficult to see the logic behind it or to support it. From what we have been told, TSA's reorganization will not result in any tangible cost savings. I would urge the witnesses today and other officials at TSA and DHS to look at this committee as a partner in your efforts. The sooner we are informed of the changes you plan to make, the better. Today, I look forward to hearing directly from the leadership of Federal Air Marshal Service about these recent organizational changes, how air marshals are adapting to the constantly revolving threats we face from terrorists, and ways we can reduce the burden on taxpayers. With that, I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes for her opening statement.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today to discuss the Federal Air Marshal Service, and I'd also like to thank Chairman Rogers, who knew of my interest and my request for this hearing, for holding this important and timely hearing to take a closer look at the Federal Air Marshal Program and discuss the recent findings in a report released last week by the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General. The Aviation Transportation Security Act of 2002 designated the Federal Air Marshal Service as a law enforcement organization within the Transportation Security Administration. Prior to September 11th, the Federal Air Marshals comprised a workforce of 33 Sky Marshals. After 9/11, it became clear that a 33-person unit would not be sufficient to protect the American flying public from a new threat. The idea of Federal Air Marshals, I believe, is, again, as I've said often in this committee, part of the front line of defense of the American homeland. FAMs were vastly expanded to address vulnerabilities exposed on 9/11. The Federal Air Marshal Service serves as the last line of defense for thousands of passengers on flights both domestic and international. While FAMs police our skies and protect passengers, we must wonder what happens when they leave the airport and return to the office. In the last 3 years, we've learned about a hostile work environment epitomized by the use of a crude game to demean FAMs who are women, minority group members, or gays. Today, the Inspector General will testify that 47% of survey respondents fear retaliation if they speak out about workplace conditions. Today, we'll hear from the leadership of FAMs about the plan to correct the workforce issues that have long plagued this organization. We will also hear from the Inspector General about the recommendations he has made to remedy the issues at FAMs. Compounding my concern about the Inspector General's report is the fact that the workforce challenges at FAMs are not new. In 2005, the GAO released a report recommending that FAMs develop a communication strategy to share expectations and report related progress within its workforce. In 2009, the GAO released another report recommending that the director of FAMs take appropriate actions to increase the usefulness of the workforce satisfaction surveys. Today, we will receive testimony from the IG recommending that the director of FAMs provide increased transparency in forms of communication across the organization, particularly between rank and file, FAMs, and management. It seems that every examination of FAMs, whether by GAO or the Inspector General, finds a workplace that needs improved transparency, increased communication, and opportunities for upward mobility. Knowing some of the FAMs myself and seeing them at work, I know that they are, however, dedicated and committed to serving the American people, but we must allow everyone to serve in dignity as a FAM on behalf of the American people. It is also clear that every examination since 2005 has yielded a promise from FAM's management that practices would improve and conditions would change. It appears that those promises have not been kept. Today, I do not want to hear about new promises. Today, I want to learn how FAM's leadership will keep its commitment to those Federal Air Marshals who risk their lives every day to protect the flying public. I frankly, in conclusion, would like to see FAMs increased and introduce H.R. 71, which would increase the number of Federal Air Marshals for certain flights, require criminal investigative training for such marshals, create an office and appoint an ombudsman for marshals and for other purposes. I'm committed to the excellence of FAMs. I want to see the leadership and the team working together but as well working together with a diverse force, if you will, that can work harmoniously on behalf of the American people. I look forward to hearing from Director Bray on what actions he intends to take to address workforce challenges once and for all. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady and other members of the committee who reminded their opening statements can be submitted for the record. We're pleased to have several distinguished witnesses before us today on this important topic. Let me remind the witnesses that their entire statements will appear in the record, and you'll be given 5 minutes to summarize it so we can get to the Q&A. First witness is Mr. Robert Bray. He currently serves as the Assistant Administrator for Law Enforcement and the Director for the Federal Air Marshal Service, TSA. Mr. Bray began his career with FAMS in 2003 as an Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Mission Operations Center at the FAA Technical Center in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Mr. Bray has joined by two of his TSA colleagues, Mr. Michael Novak, who currently serves as the Assistant Administrator for Training and Workforce Engagement, and Mr. Roderick Allison, who currently serves as a Deputy Assistant Administrator for Law Enforcement. Mr. Bray will be offering an opening statement on behalf of himself, Mr. Novak, and Mr. Allison, and he's now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Jackson Lee, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the Transportation Security Administration, Office of Law Enforcement, Federal Air Marshal Service, and our mission to detect, deter, and defeat terrorist threats to the nation's transportation systems. With me today is former FAMS Deputy Director Mike Novak, who is now TSA's Assistant Administrator for the Office of Training and Workforce Engagement. Mr. Novak was a former Assistant Director of Training for the FAMS. In addition, I also want to introduce Mr. Roderick Allison, who was recently named as the Deputy Director of FAMS, and who most recently served as our Assistant Deputy Director for Flight Operations. I would also like to introduce Joe Samuels and Mel Caraway. They are, respectively, the new Supervisory Air Marshals in charge of the Orlando and Dallas office.
Welcome.
Before 9/11, the FAA employed just 33 air marshals who flew primarily international missions. Following the passage of the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, FAMS was officially transferred to TSA. Today, Federal Air Marshals are the primary law enforcement entity within TSA and are deployed on flights with the United States and around the world. And Federal Air Marshals make great personal and professional sacrifices every day in the performance of their vital mission to our nation. Transformation within the Department of Homeland Security led to a period in which the FAMS transitioned to the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE, before returning to TSA in 2005. Today, OLE FAMS serves DHS in a variety of critical roles. We operate the Freedom Center, which contains the Transportation Security Operations Center, also known as the TSOC, as well as the Canine Training Program. Within TSA's Office of Security Operations, we administer the Visible Intermodal Prevention and Response Program, which is also known as VIPER, which is aimed at enhancing transit security. Additionally, we manage the personnel security clearance process for TSA and conduct both joint vulnerability assessments for airports as well as man-portable air defense systems, or MANPADS assessments. 10 years after 9/11, our mission is no longer separate from TSA's other transportation security missions. Today, our responsibilities make us a key component of TSA's transportation security counterterrorism strategy. As you know, TSA is currently implementing an agency-wide transformation initiative. The plan reflects a fully integrated FAMS realigned into operational divisions that support and enhance the TSA law enforcement mission. This new structure will enable TSA to more efficiently and effectively execute its day-to-day national security mission imperatives, establish a meaningful and realistic strategic vision for its law enforcement programs, and maintain the flexibility needed to address evolving and emerging threats to the nation's transportation systems. A highly trained workforce is essential to the success of TSA. Transitioning the FAMS Training Center and other FAMS training programs to the newly established Office of Training and Workforce Engagement under Mike Novak is an important step towards reaching that goal. FAMS training will remain an independent division under the Office of Training and Workforce Engagement, continuing to serve our specific mission needs, while TSA benefits from the professional experience of former FAMS executives like Mike Novak. Law enforcement is our essential function, and this transformation will enhance FAMS' ability to focus on what it does best, providing TSA with an agile, responsive, and professional law enforcement component that complements the overall TSA mission. FAMS will streamline from 5 divisions to 3. We will have the Flight Operations Division, the Security Services and Assessment Division, and the Field Operations Division. Remaining functions from the other administrative and technical, from the former Administrative and Technical Services and Training and Workforce Program Directorates will transfer to the appropriate TSA division, and some supporting elements will transfer to the FAMS Business Office. This model supports a field-centric approach, allowing branch managers and staff to focus solely on the needs and management of the local field offices. This approach also provides the ability to consider field office consolidation issues within our concept of operations. This alignment will also contribute to correcting some issues noted in the report by the Office of Inspector General. The OIG investigated allegations of misconduct and illegal discrimination and retaliation in the FAMS, and the report found those allegations to be unfounded. The OIG did find, however, that the FAMS suffered from a lack of management cohesion, negative workforce perceptions, and a lack of compliance with headquarters direction in the matters of office operations and philosophy. Changing this management structure and reinvigorating the field Office of Field Operations addresses some of the OIG's concerns by creating a foundation for a real positive cultural change to our workforce. We welcome the OIG review and will continue working closely with them going forward. We realize there is work to be done as we continue to mature and advance our organization. We look forward to working with Congress and the IG to ensure the agency's continued improvement. Additionally, as the OIG report noted, these challenges have not and will not interfere with the mission of the FAMS. Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Jackson Lee, we thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bray, for your testimony. We appreciate you being here today, and we know your time is valuable. Our next witness, Mr. Charles Edwards, is the Acting Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security and no stranger to this committee. I'm glad to have you back. Mr. Edwards assumed this position in February 2011. Previously served as Deputy Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Edwards has over 20 years of experience in federal government and has held leadership positions at several federal agencies, including TSA, the U.S. Postal Service offices of Inspector General, and the United States Postal Service. The chair now recognizes the famous Charles Edwards.
Good afternoon, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Jackson Lee, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding allegations of misconduct, discrimination, and retaliation in the Federal Air Marshal Service, or FAMS. My office reviewed these allegations and published the results in a recent report titled Allegations of Misconduct and Illegal Discrimination and Retaliation in the Federal Air Marshal Service. In early 2010, several members of Congress reached out to my office requesting a review of FAMS after media reports surfaced regarding misconduct, illegal employment discrimination, and retaliation in the FAMS Orlando field office. Included within the media reports were descriptions of an agency rife with cronyism, age, gender, and racial discrimination, and unfair treatment in promotions, assignments, and discipline. In addition, there were troublesome photographs of a game board modeled after the television show Jeopardy! The game board was created and displayed by supervisors in the Orlando office with categories using derogatory nicknames to refer to certain individuals' race, gender, and sexual orientation. My office agreed to undertake an inspection to evaluate these allegations. Our goal was to determine whether the facts confirm the specific allegations about the conditions in the FAMS Orlando field office and whether the alleged conditions existed nationwide. As part of our review, we looked at applicable laws, regulations, directives, policies, and procedures. Furthermore, we conducted more than 300 interviews of officials as well as current and former FAMS personnel. Additionally, we performed site visits to FAMS field offices, including Orlando, and reviewed internal FAMS records. With respect to Jeopardy! Game board, this incident was isolated in the Orlando field office and was not the source of allegations in other offices. All 3 individuals responsible for the game board's creation are no longer with FAMS. Overall, we determined that although several employees experienced discrimination, a finding of widespread discrimination and retaliation within FAMS is not supported. Unfortunately, employees' perception of discrimination, retaliation, and favoritism are extensive. During our inspection, we identified many factors that contributed to strained relations and were basis of allegations of management misconduct. For example, due to the nature of the agency's mission, FAMs have limited interaction with their supervisors. Evaluating FAMs based on such limited interaction is difficult and may lead to disagreements. We noted inconsistency and the need for greater transparency and expediency in the agency's handling of employee misconduct. We also found that discipline was perceived as unfair, inconsistently applied, and not at the appropriate severity level for the offense and used for retaliatory purposes. Several other unclear operational and administrative FAMS policies lead to employees' negative perceptions. As part of our inspection, we also conducted a survey of the FAMS workforce. Approximately 50% of the workforce responded. The survey results echoed what we observed during our site visits. 1/4 of respondents feel that they have been discriminated against, 47% feel retaliation, and 55% feel favoritism is tolerated. The survey also revealed that most, but not all, supervisors disagree with the supervisory federal air marshals' perception of these issues. As concerning as these issues are, they do not appear to have compromised the FAM's mission. Despite the concerns expressed in field offices, 76% of survey respondents either agreed or strongly agreed that the people they work with cooperate to get the job done. Nonetheless, these allegations add unnecessary distraction at all levels at a time when mission tempo is high and many in the agency are becoming increasingly concerned about the workforce burnout and fatigue. Thus, our report included 12 recommendations to help mitigate these issues. These include identifying other means to evaluate FAM's performance, clarifying and enhancing administration of the discipline process, enhancing guidance for ground-based assignments. We would like TSA to develop a strategy to address perceptions of discrimination, retaliation, and favoritism, as well as the workplace issues identified in our survey. While TSA and FAM's leadership are committed to addressing these issues and have implemented several proactive initiatives, we will continue to work with TSA and the department to identify ways to strengthen communication and increase transparency within the Federal Air Marshal Service. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared remarks, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you other members may have. Thank you.
Great, I thank you. And Chair now recognizes himself for questions. I want to start, Mr. Bray. You know, everybody knows what the economic situation in this country is right now, and particularly the economic situation of this government. We're broke, and I was frankly pleased to see the budget number that the President tendered for Homeland overall, because it wasn't as bad as it could have been, and it wasn't nearly as bad as what we're dealing with in the armed services. I serve on the House Armed Services Committee, so thankful for what we've got. But having said that, we still have the reality of budgets being tight for a while. So in thinking forward about what we're going to be dealing with, I look at your organization, and you're right at $1 billion right now, and that's a huge amount of money. Can you point to one or two things that you're proud of that have been cost-saving measures that you've taken recently, let's say in the last year?
Sir, I think we have many cost-saving measures I can point to. The ones that I speak about are associated with many different things that we look at throughout the years as to being more efficient and trying to be provide as an effective layer of security that we can. We always work. We have all of our employees. The vast majority of our costs when we travel is for the cost of the hotels. So we work with both GSA and our own people to try to bring down those costs, and we're always studying the cost of the hotels when our people have to stay overnight or when they travel overseas. Obviously, a significant portion of our costs involved when we travel overseas, so we focus on that on a very regular basis. I have weekly meetings with our budget staff to look at our costs. If you look at the model that we have for our organization, and if you go to our field offices, we have a different model for our field offices as far as the overhead costs where we have one central training facility in each field office, so we have decentralized training for our field offices. We have very few offices. We use the hoteling concept where people share a cubicle when they're, because obviously our FAMs, their job is to be in the air, not to be in the office, except for on a very regular basis when they're training or when they're in there for certain other administrative duties or to meet with their supervisors on that infrequent basis when they're able to do that. So we try to save costs there, and we're always looking for other ways to save costs.
Well, what I would like to ask you, I know the president has asked y'all to come up with proposals to cut your budget by a certain number next year or maybe the year after. I would like to ask that you provide for the committee a proposal that would show us, I know that my friend and colleague over here wants to give you a whole lot more people, and I may go along with her on that, I hadn't decided, but just for our edification and to help us prepare for what may come. You know, next year we may be the Defense Department where we're being told to take a big hit. I'd like for y'all to tender a proposal to this committee showing that if you had to reduce 5% of your budget each year for the next 5 years, this is what you have to give up. And it would just force you to prioritize and say, now, we doing this, we think it's important, we want to keep doing it, but if you take 5% of the money away, this is what's going to drop off. If you do that for me, I'd appreciate it. Can you tell me what kind of time frame would be reasonable? Because I don't want to put too much on you. Everybody's looking at each other. Who's going to do this?
Sir, if it's agreeable with you, how about 30 days? That'll give us time to go through it.
That's fine. That's very fine. I appreciate that. As I talked about in my opening statement, the threat has changed significantly since 9/11 because terrorists have modified their tactics based on security measures we put in place. To the extent that you can discuss this in an open setting, what is FAMS doing to adapt to the evolving threat and stay ahead of the terrorist? For example, are air marshals prepared to deal with the threat of an IED? And I'll take that, Mr. Allison or Novak, whichever one of y'all.
So, yeah, that is something that we train for. So the way the training academy works is we train to general tenets, if you will, principles about how to conduct themselves on a plane. So you can take that from anything from an unruly passenger all the way up to an IED, if you will, on a passenger or someone trying to pick up the plane. So we do train to those things.
So what would you do if you had a suspected bomber on the plane? Let's say the Christmas Day bomber, somebody tipped off to you, they saw him going to the restroom and he had an explosive in his hand, whatever. Can you talk about that in open session?
Not really. We don't like to discuss tactics, but we do have those scenarios, those very scenarios that you talk about.
Thank you. My time's expired. Chair now recognizes the ranking member for any questions she may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think if you could tell me what the President's budget, Mr. Bray, has submitted your agency for, what are the cuts from 2012, FY 2012? Okay, so what did you receive in 20? I didn't hear you. What did you receive?
Our enacted appropriation in 2011 was $927 million.
Okay. And you're now at?
$966 million.
Okay. So you went up, if
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
hearing your numbers correctly. And do you foresee, I think we can generally, I don't ask you for the numbers, do you foresee cuts in FAMs, working FAMs, besides management?
I think we would, yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm not asking for any numbers.
Yes.
All right. Let me move to the points that I made in my opening remarks. I think in 2009 you testified regarding two initiatives that were going to be implemented in FY10 with the goal of improving FAM's workforce issues and morale. You call one program the FAM Mentoring Program, and you also referenced a promotion restructure as the Senior Federal Air Marshal title change across FAMs. Now, again, our IG points to low workforce morale stemming from the Senior Federal Air Marshal Program, as I can recollect from his testimony and report. Can you brief me as to why you believe this program seemingly has had an opposite effect, this introduction of the Senior Federal Air Marshal Program?
The purpose of the Senior Federal Air Marshal Program is to recognize those flying fans who have served for a certain period of time, and they have served well, and it's a recognition of their effort and dedication and professionalism towards our nation. And there's no monetary sums to that. There's no other sums for promotion or anything else. It's just a recognition of their service. So we have a certain percentage of FAMs that are eligible for that. We are reviewing that. We have a FAM Advisory Council that has made some recommendations to us. We've worked with our Supervisory Advisory Council, and I believe in the very near future we're going to make some changes to that program that I think based on the recommendations from the FAM Advisory Council.
Does it also take in consideration the comments made or the report made by the Inspector General?
Yes, it does.
Let me ask the Inspector General, you indicate in your testimony that you didn't seem to find the widespread discrimination and retaliation supported. Explain that to me, and what methods did you use to determine that they were not supported? We're still getting emails indicating that people are still seemingly treated in a disparate manner.
Thank you, ma'am. We visited 5 sites. We conducted interviews from everybody who wanted to talk to us, either at the office or in an off-site. We also did a survey where 50% of FAMs from all demographics responded to the survey. The perception of discrimination was widely there, but when we looked at it, when we went out to do this inspection, we did not want to address individual complaints, because there's a process for that. There's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the MSPP, and also Court of Law. So a lot of these were already in litigation. So we looked to see there was so much of distrust between supervisory federal air marshals and non-supervisory air marshals. And however, we did not find a widespread discrimination.
Which one of your recommendation points to trying to cure that problem?
If you look at recommendations 2 and 4.
Of the 12?
And 12.
No, I said of the 12.
Of the 12, 2 and 4 talks about the discipline process, and 10 talks about the promotion. People feel that there is not a fair process there. And then 12, we talk about an action plan for the survey.
So you're suggesting this is what needs to be done, what needs to be implemented?
Right away, yes.
All right, and have you had any response back on your report from the agency? From
Yes.
FAMS, rather?
Yes, they have concurred. Recommendation 9 is already closed, even before our report could be issued. So they are working with us.
In your report, you include charts that isolate various workplace issues by office. One in particular happens to fall in the state of Texas. It seems that the Dallas office leads for workplace problems. Would it be possible for your office to do an in-depth review of the Dallas office to determine what is going on in that office? And if that was occurring in 1 or 2 other offices, which has come to our attention, would that be possible?
It is possible, but however, ma'am, I would like to point out that we spent nearly 1.5 weeks in Dallas field office. We interviewed around 60 personnel, including managers, supervisors, and FAMs. And we collected a lot of survey data. So we believe, since we need to give time for FAM's leadership and for the recommendations to work its way through, I'll be glad to look at the Dallas field office. And also they have a new leadership there. So we want to give some time for that. Even the 5 sites we picked up, we looked at the MSPP data to see where the most complaints were. Of course, Dallas was one of them. But I feel that we need to give some time for this recommendations to take effect.
Let me close by, since I have a lot on this particular issue, but let me ask Mr. Gray. Thank you very much, Mr. Edwards. I am looking at your diversity. I'm looking at the participation of women. I see some progress has been made in the number of women working in FAMS. A lot of work remains to be done, particularly when it comes to the SES positions. For instance, there are only 4 women serving in SES positions. What I would just want to hear from you, Mr. Bray, is your outreach in recruiting women and minorities, and also the in my HR 71, I talk about criminal investigative training and how would you welcome that kind of training coming to FAMS?
Thank you for the opportunity to respond. We have a very strong outreach to the diversity groups that we work with, whether it's the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement, the Women in Federal Law Enforcement. And I'd just like to say that the current active president for Women in Federal Law Enforcement is a federal air marshal. We also work with them on diversity and recruiting. We have as I said, we have a very strong program to attend the conferences every year. I try to attend at least 2 or 3 conferences every year, where we have senior leadership at every conference to put forth the word that we want to hire a diverse workforce and to maintain that workforce. As far as the criminal investigator training program, I believe it's essential that we continue to look at our training as we see terrorism evolve, as we see them adapt and evolve. It's incumbent upon me to make sure that my employees have the most forward-thinking and advanced training they can get as far as being able to respond. We all know that when FAMs are in the air, there's no chance of backup for them, so it's incumbent upon me to make sure they have the most advanced training we can, and we work with Federal Law Enforcement Training Center on some of those initiatives.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Krabak, for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bray, thank you for your testimony today. And one of the things, as a federal flight deck officer and an airline pilot for 17 years, one of the things that we learned after 9/11, you can't have a single point security check. It's a layered approach. It takes a lot of people to make sure that from when you initially buy your ticket to when you enter the aircraft, there's all types of layers of security. In regards to, and I'll try to say this very gently, yesterday we had Secretary Napolitano here, and she said the last line of defense was the cockpit door. In view of the layered security, how would you go about the Secretary's comment? Would you like to redefine her remarks?
I think I'd like to say that we are...
Or do you want to take a pass? Feel free.
I think what I would say is that I think it's very important that all the layers of security are strong and vibrant. And I think as far as the FFDO program, they are an important layer of our security. I personally appreciate all the work and professionalism and dedication they have and all the time they volunteer to help us in our very important role in aviation security.
Did the Secretary ask you at all in regards to the budgetary cuts for FFDOs? Were you involved in that at all?
We do have discussions. I have discussions through my chain of command about that, yes, sir.
Okay. Can you give us an idea of who decided to cut the FFDU program in half, basically?
I don't have personal knowledge in that, but as was referred to earlier, we all have to make some very challenging decisions in the current economic climate and going forward. So we always make decisions based on the risk base and the intelligence that we receive.
Sure, and I understand risk-based, I understand that correctly, but I'm assuming, and we won't talk numbers, but I'm assuming that the numbers in regards to the budget, the number of FAMs are going to stay relatively the same. Would that be a correct statement or incorrect statement?
I think that's generally
okay.
Correct.
Generally statement. Now, cutting the program in half, we have 29,000 flights a day, I think. Cutting that program in half with the same amount of FAMs, but basically cutting the program for FFDOs in half, that's going to leave a lot of open sky, in my opinion. And I'm just very concerned on, especially one of the most efficient programs that I can see in the federal government. I think it costs $15 for every flight to have an FFDO on in comparison to other flights. For example, FFDOs take their personal days off for training. They pay for their own lodging. They pay to go to their own training. And I think it's one of the most efficient programs that we have, and provides one of the most essential, last-ditch efforts. Plus, it's an extremely covert program. You're not going to be able to tell if there's an FFDO in that cockpit or not. It's one of the chief deterrents that I can see. They're seamless with the FAMs. I mean, the majority of people don't know FAMs are on board as well. And it's very discerning to me to see that this program was cut in half, and it's, quite frankly, it's peanuts in the overall spectrum of things. $23 million, they cut it down to $12 million. I think the other questions that I would have would probably be best suited for a more secure environment. But I just wanted to get your comments on, do you think that with a cut in the program in the FFDOs right now, do you think it would affect our security overall?
We're still examining the proposals, but what we hope to do with the proposed cuts is to really look at the overhead that we have in the program as far as some of the training support contracts we have on the requalification areas. We hope to look at some of the overhead we have within our program as far as the number of training sites, to cut that possibly, to really try to do all we can to minimize the impact on the flying FFDOs. So we're looking at that first. So I'd like to defer any further comment on that until we really...
Well, unfortunately, as I understand it, there hasn't been any FFDOs new FFDOs in the program for over a year now. Would that be a correct statement? They've not had a training class for over a year for new FFDOs.
Mr. Congressman, I believe we were scheduled to have 200 or so FFDOs this year.
How many?
200 or so.
200? Okay, that would be new information for me then. Okay. Thank you very much. My time's expired, and I'll go back negative time.
Thank you, gentlemen. I just got a couple of more questions before we go into secure session. And this is Mr. Bray. As a result of TSA's transformation initiative, I understand that law enforcement officials had their titles changed from regional directors to branch managers, which is a title more common for a bank or an insurance company or whatever. And you know, these are high-performing law enforcement, well-trained personnel. We've heard about the morale problems. Is this something you've been getting feedback on about this title, and no problem at all?
Sir, I would respond, Mr. Chairman, I would respond to that by a couple of years ago, based on some advice that, well, I guess it's about a year and a half ago now, based on advice from our Family Advisory Council. I started changing the titles for some of our supervisors. Previously, they used to be called special agents in charge. That, I think, caused a gulf between the federal air marshals and the supervisors. So now, when I introduced the supervisory federal air marshals from Orlando and Dallas, they are now called supervisory federal air marshals. So we've been undertaking that initiative, that transformation, for a while as far as changing our titles. I have not heard any feedback that that's affected anyone's morale and the leadership within the organization.
Good. We've heard significant concern about the decision to merge FAMS training with the training of transportation security officers, or TSOs. The responsibilities of these two groups are very different. Notably, air marshals are law enforcement officials, whereas TSOs who conduct passenger screening are not law enforcement. What's your view on the decision to merge TSA's training programs, thereby shutting down separate FAMS training operation? I guess that would be Mr. Novak.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. So what you're saying is correct, but when you look at it, there's actually a separate law enforcement division and a separate transportation security officer division. So the training won't actually be the same.
Same training.
Yeah, so the FAMS Training Center in Atlantic City will remain as such, and the FAMS will go there for their training. So nothing really will impact the way we train FAMS.
Okay, so you don't see that training suffering any?
I don't.
Okay. Ms. Novak, you are the first person to assume the role of Assistant Administrator for the newly created Office of Training and Workforce Engagement. Why was the decision made to establish a new office?
What I think when Mr. Pistol came in as the administrator, from his previous time at the FBI, he looked at the organization, and there were actually training departments in different sections of the organization, and it just brought out the obvious question: why would there be training departments in other programs? So, effective, efficient. Here we are about efficiency. Is it better suited to move things together and combine forces?
So what are your responsibilities?
My responsibilities are coordinating all the training that happens throughout the organization. So consolidating all those folks to make sure the messaging is the same. The training tactics are different, but the messaging for the organization is the same.
Thank you. Mr. Edwards, you talked a little while ago about widespread perception problems, even though your investigation didn't find the problems that were alleged. You said that there were extensive perception problems. Why do you think that is?
Well, based on the interviews, Chairman, and the survey responses, there's a perception because the non-supervisory FAMs and the supervisory FAMs, they don't trust each other. There's also a perception that senior leadership doesn't hold supervisory FAMs accountable. So there's so much of mistrust. In terms of getting awards, there's no common criteria. Every office kind of determines it differently. When so little time is spent for a flying FAM and with their supervisor, how are they going to measure the performance? There's no, so we recommend that TSA provide guidance on awards and promotions, even getting promoted to a supervisory FAM. There needs to be transparency in the application process. There should be some criteria. So we have made a number of changes, and FAM's leadership and TSA have accepted that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Chair now recognizes the ranking member for any additional questions she may have.
Chairman, your line of question raised several questions. Let me ask, Mr. Novak, is the role that you play deals with training for all of the TSL personnel, including TSO officers?
That is correct.
Okay, so you coordinate for everyone, and including FAMs.
Correct.
And do you have a distinguished and thank you. You have obviously structured training that differs from TSO officers to FAM officers. Is that correct?
Correct.
In your training, are supervisors involved in the training?
Well, it's funny you mention that. I'm actually preparing a course for supervisory TSOs. There is supervisory training right now, but one of the things that I've heard has been that our supervisory training for TSOs could be better. So I've looked at it. I just came into existence January 1st of this year. So, but I have had a meeting yesterday for 2 hours with the group that's reviewing all that, and I'm going to release something in the next couple months. That'll be a 2-week program that will hopefully give them the fundamentals that they need.
So for FAMs, do you include FAM supervisors in as well as the FAM officers for training?
Yes. There is a supervisory course that we introduced probably a year and a half ago for FAM supervisors, and it touches on a lot of the same things that I'm going to incorporate into the TSO.
Well, I think you have a wide purview, so how are you going to really answer the question? I probably disagree with our very fine Inspector General. I think the report on his face is a very good report, but you cannot have perception, widespread perception, without reality. Somebody is feeling, and there is reality of discrimination or lack of communication between supervisors and the line officers. What are you going to do about that? Because you're in the training and professional development.
That's right. So I can offer more training, but what we've done is, as I mentioned earlier, this supervisory course that Director Bray implemented is really a great start. Now that was implemented while the Inspector General was doing their review. So I think we're turning the tide. We're talking about having our folks make sure that our FAMs succeed. We're giving them every opportunity to succeed.
And what did you say that Mr. Bray had that you thought was working?
We introduced a supervisory training course.
Is that talking to them about communicating and working with the line officers? So what is your mode for assessment? What is your audit to determine that it works?
that will be surveys like this in the future. But there's an assessment actually that the supervisors take to review what they think their skills are.
Can I ask you then to be part of, obviously I don't run your shop, but can I have you see the connection? If you're training and trying to break through on some of the issues that Mr. Edwards has commented on, you need to see whether your training is working, whether people are learning to work together, whether the barriers or the walls of discrimination that are perceived through your training can be broken down.
That's true.
So I'd like to, as I said, the chairman has given you a request, noted it was 30 days, but I'd like to get a report back on what impact or what is the results of the training on one of the major elements of the Inspector General's report, and whether or not you're crafting training to improve the diversity relationships, and whether or not you have training that allows or says supervisors can supervise people from all backgrounds, which is obviously you can put it in the terms of the structure of your training. I'd like that report back. Ms. Allison, you're under law enforcement. Would criminal investigation training be helpful to your FAMs?
Yes, Mr. Actually, I believe it is, or would be. I actually was hired as a federal marshal back in 1998 out of the military, and I actually attended the criminal investigation training program. There are a number of lesson plans and training attributes there that we believe would be beneficial to our workforce.
And what is your perception of the need for breaking what people perceive to be discriminatory treatment?
I actually think what Mr. Edwards outlined is right on the money. Clearly, we need to improve our sense of team as an organization. The way we operate and the infrequency of contact between the management and the FAMs that are flying, it's just human nature that infamiliarity breeds mistrust. So we certainly need to bridge the divide where it comes to the communication aspects. We need to invoke and mandate more transparency in our policies and procedures with respect to the issues that are on the minds of the flying federal air marshals, and also more consistency in our field offices.
Are you recruiting, where are you mostly recruiting your officers from? Are they retired federal law enforcement, or do they come from, are you going out in the field and finding good, not to reflect on anyone that's retired, but are you looking in other places, colleges, for example?
Yes, ma'am. I actually, a while back, did a recruiting trip at some HBCUs a number of years ago. But we have representatives across the offices in the field who are recruiters, and they go to colleges, and they make all folks aware of the announcements when they come out for the vacancies for air marshals. We also work very closely with the different law enforcement groups and to actively recruit and give people experiences and sort of a look inside the organization to offer that as a venue for employment. I actually championed an effort recently with Noble for summer internship positions to give opportunities for those who may not would have had them.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask unanimous consent, thank you very much, Mr. Allison, to submit the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Vinnie G. Thompson's statement into the record. And I have likewise a question that I'd like to submit into the record and ask, it will be of Mr. Bray, I'd specifically like a sooner rather than later, like an immediate response, and it deals with the issue of FAMs hired in the hiring of numerous U.S. Secret Service retirees and their annuity. So it's a detailed question. I think it's appropriate for a detailed response. I ask unanimous consent to submit the question into the record in writing, but also to ask for an expeditious response, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered. Thank you, gentlelady, and Miss Allison. I'm glad to hear y'all are doing that. And by the way, I've got 3 HBCUs in my district. If you want to send some recruiters down to Talladega, Tuskegee, or Alabama State, I'd appreciate it.
You do well to do so, and come on down to Texas Southern University.
All right, Mr. Krabak, do you have one more question before we go to closed session?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to follow up. In Minnesota, good central work ethic. So here, I want to let you know about those guys too. I had a question, and it was alluded to, Mr. Allison, was the discrimination basically between the frontline troops and supervisory? Is that where I'm seeing, or not discrimination, but distrust? Is that what we're seeing, or?
Yes, Mr. Congressman, the federal marshals who are in the field offices finding missions every day, and then the first line supervisors who are principally their first line supervisors.
Yeah, and I can understand it because usually FAMs are phase grade and underway. I mean, they're gone constantly. They have to introduce themselves to their family every now and then. So, they've had as many flight hours as a pilot. So, I understand that. So I just wanted to I think I heard that. So it's from the frontline troops, distrust, or from frontline troops basically to the head shed.
Yeah, to some degree, yes, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll go back.
I think, gentlemen, in discussion with our witnesses, we've agreed that the remainder of this discussion is very sensitive in nature, and the information to be discussed, if it were disclosed, could endanger national security or compromise sensitive law enforcement information. Therefore, I have consulted with the ranking member, and we are in agreement that the remainder of today's hearing should be conducted in closed classified session. Pursuant to Rule 11, Clause 2G2 of the U.S. House of Representatives, I ask unanimous consent that the remainder of the hearing be closed to the public. Hearing no objection, we will now recess and go down to the skiff. And by the way, I have a hard stop at 4 o'clock, so if we could walk quickly, I'd appreciate it.